Alright, chat, we're gonna read Major's article. This is on banning Nadu Winged Wisdom in Modern. It's written by Michael Majors. Used to be,
Also, hi, chat.
Chat, can you hear Mason?
I sound in the distance on stream.
Yes. Is he too loud?
Yeah, chat can hear me. Great. Hi, chat. I'm one of the playtesters for MH3.
No.
We're going to talk about Nadu now.
Yeah.
Once Ginger's done reading.
Okay. You're too far away.
I'm going to mute myself and eat some grapes while you read.
Okay. You can be in next to talk about how great Yogg is. Alright, so we're gonna read this article. I'm gonna try to read it as fast as possible. It's by Michael Majors. Used to be, I think, a Gold Pro, and he was on the SCG circuit for quite a bit. Had quite the tear on there before he...
I think he was Platinum for what's worth.
He was Plat? Okay, I didn't know if he was Plat or Gold.
Yeah.
Obviously, very good player. He's been working at Wizards for, what, 5 years? 6 years? Before COVID. Yeah, okay. And he oversaw you, or like he was your boss, basically?
So Majors was the lead designer for MH3.
Mm-hmm.
He had final say on everything, was my understanding. Don't quote me on that. As far as it comes to card balance or whatever, that's my understanding. Maybe there's someone above him. I don't know all the ins and outs, but yes, he was the person who picked me for the team.
Okay.
He is the person who oversaw everything.
Cool.
And had final say. He is the set lead.
Cool. All right, well, I'll get started then. As a lead designer of MH3, I wanted to weigh in on our decision today. Nadu Winged Wisdom was a design mistake. The community quickly identified in preview season that the combination of Shuko or Outrider and Core with Nadu could allow a player to draw their entire library. As one would expect, many early lists were untuned, being either too fragile or using Nadu more as an afterthought than a primary game plan. Before PT MH3, Nadu was clearly a strong deck, but it hadn't quite shown itself as bannable. As we know, the PT changed that. The best players in the world had the incentive to tune the deck for the highest possible upside, and they delivered. They removed Thassa's Oracle from the deck and figured out how to handle any situation through a convoluted Endurance and Spring Heart and Nantuko loop that could effectively give Nadu players infinite mana and the means to fight through any situation, including interaction and battlefield sweepers. This loop also required demonstrating a complicated series of game actions with a high number of permanents, changing zones that resulted in extremely long turns. The deck was beautifully built and a logistical nightmare. The deck dominated the tournament with a 59% win rate, and Simon Nielsen claimed the PT trophy. Since then, it has performed worse. Some of this can be attributed to the fact that the deck is objectively weaker in online formats. Many players still resort to using Thassa's Oracle, a weak card outside of the combo once they've drawn their entire deck, due to the Endurance loop being unrealistic under an online timer. This makes the deck more vulnerable to mulligans and weaker to interaction. Despite that, it continues to be a prevalent part of the winner's metagame of Magic Online and is threatening to put up incredible numbers at RCQs. Removing another combination card like Shuko or Outrider and Core wouldn't solve the logistical problem that Nadu presents. Even at weaker win rates, Nadu leveraging Lightning Greaves or similar cards could still be problematic for the long-term enjoyment of tournaments. Since it threatens to monopolize people's time, all while not being finding an easy deck to interact with, there isn't a compelling argument to preserve the deck. For these reasons, Nadu is banned. So how did we get here? Nadu went through almost all of MH3's development looking something like this. Nadu Winged Wisdom. 1 green-blue, legendary creature, 3/4, flying. You may cast permanent spells as though they had flash. Whenever a permanent you control becomes a target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it on the battlefield. Otherwise, put it in your hand. Nadu is a powerful option... Well,
let's stop for a second.
Okay,
I'm curious
pause.
Your thoughts on this card. Because this is the version that I basically saw. Of note, there was a slightly different version. Like you said, this is most of the development. There was a version of this that was pretty unplayable. Basically, not even like a standard rare. But that doesn't really matter for the sake of the conversation. You know what I mean? I'm curious, if we had released this Nadu, obviously, you have the hindsight of broken Nadu. I assume this card would see Sunlight of Fringe play in quarter calling decks as like an answer to interaction. But probably not because it's 3 mana. But if it was 2 mana and like a 1/2 or something, maybe.
This card seems like a kind of card that Spike would build a deck around.
Sure.
Where he would make it look like really good. Like because there's like something missing. The fact that it says opponent is obviously problematic, and the fact that like it's just worse than like Veil of Summer the majority of the time. Yeah, the fact that it's flash is kind of relevant.
Of note, it doesn't. It gives other things flash.
Right, it gives other things flash. So like that's cool if you like. There's the recent deck that Spike built with Omniscience. You could probably, or like there's that deck in fucking what's the vintage arena format where like you put in omniscience into play with show and tell. Obviously this isn't the same, but
yeah. I know what you're talking about.
This having the ley line of the blue ley line effect is powerful, but it certainly is missing something. Like it needed to be a mana less, or it needed to not say opponent's spells or abilities. I mean, obviously, but both of those things probably break the card.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think this card, if this version had been shipped, there would be no conversation today, is my opinion.
It wouldn't even show up on people's radars.
Yeah, it would be like a commander card. There'd probably be some fringe use of it in the sideboard, but ultimately being a 3-mana card is probably too, like, prohibitive for Modern. That's my... You can continue with the article. I just wanted to check in. That's where I believe things to be. And as you'll see going forward, this is the last version I saw of Nadu before y'all saw Nadu. You may continue ahead.
Nadu is a powerful option against interaction and part of various BANT mid-range strategies throughout our testing, but it wasn't something that our group perceived much more than a role player. For some more context, MH testing works differently than typical standard Future League. For both MH2 and MH3, we brought in a small group of contractors, like we have in the call right now, Young Mason, and worked on the set in a dedicated sprint as a collaboration between that group and a small number of play designers. The playtesting team is more dense as the group is singularly focused on the set without any other responsibilities, but shorter in terms of weeks. After the playtesting, there was a series of last-minute checks of some of the sets by various groups. This is the normal operation procedure for every set release. It is a series of opportunities for folks from various departments and disciplines to weigh in on every component of the project and give final feedback. In one of these meetings, there was a great deal of concern raised by Nadu's flash granting ability for the commander play. After removing the ability, it wasn't clear that the card would have an audience or a home, something that is important for every card we make. Ultimately, my intention was to create a build-around aimed at commander play, which resulted in the final text. I missed the interaction with 0-mana abilities that are so problematic. The last round of folks who were shown the card in the building missed it too. We didn't playtest with Nadu's final iteration, as we were too far along in the process, and it shipped as is. I want to go over some talking points and learnings, but before I do, I'll emphasize that despite the failings in process, ultimately the card was my responsibility and as the lead designer of the set. Go. I just
want to say really quickly that he sends it there, and I'm not going to say all the cards, but a lot of cards are different than they were when I was testing, and most of them are for the better. So I don't want people to think this is like this is a thing that happens a lot, and he mentions it in the article. You know, just a thing to keep in mind that changes do happen.
All right, the scope of risk. A lot of early buzz surrounding Nadu included comments like, why does it have 4 toughness? Or if it only triggered once, it would be okay. And the most extreme being, did they put the quotations on the card in the wrong place? As I've already gone over, the most obvious answer to thing is typically the right one. Nadu was not an attempt to push a card right up to the perceived maximum power level and missing the mark. If I had grasped the scope of risk here, I would have changed the text box entirely and not hoped that trimming a toughness would land us in the perfect spot. However, much of managing a MH set is walking that tightrope of risk. Ugin's Labyrinth and Chthonian Nightmare examples of cards that we shift with eyes wide open. There was a chance of these cards going wrong, but they are things we deemed worth doing to inject power and excitement into both lapsed and brand new decks. As a concrete example of something we changed, Amped Raptor had a much more Cascade-like early ability in development. This resulted in a lot of Glimpse of Tomorrows being cast. The deck wasn't too strong, but the combo turns took forever, and the deck wasn't very enjoyable. We even failed to patch it out a few times by changing Amped Raptor in various ways, but ultimately, we had to redesign the card to what it is now to avoid as many shenanigans as possible. The benefits of creating this new Glimpse deck didn't make up for how unenjoyable the play pattern was.
Alright, pause. That's me on the Amped Raptor Glimpse thing. Amped Raptor was like a Cascade card, and I just kept finding ways to break it with Glimpse of Tomorrow, like pretty early on, and they kept changing it and kept making it broken with Glimpse of Tomorrow. And that is like, you know, why we have the Amped Raptor we have today. Is because like Majors had to like, you know, keep changing it because of this. But I was just glimpsing and putting my whole deck into play, but it would take 40 minutes to finish a turn. It literally makes Nadu look like kind of an enjoyable play pattern.
Glimpse of Tomorrow.
It's the one where you shuffle all the permanents into your deck and then flip the top cards of your deck.
Oh, the Suspend 3 double red.
Yep.
Wait, so does this not work with Amped Raptor now?
It does, but it's so much harder to do. because you can't cascade into it. Like before, part of the problem is Raptor was a cascader that you could like hit and continue going off, basically. I think it's fine for me to probably say like so like the very first version of Amp Raptor, and mind you, there were probably like 5 Amp Raptors that I saw, but the first version was like 3 in a red, good stats, good ability. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top X cards of your deck. X is equal to some amount of energy, and it made energy. And then play a card from the top of your deck with energy cost equal to this, and put the rest on bottom.
Okay.
And that with this, it was just very easy with the elementals, like the Risen Reef stuff from before. That's kind of a meme deck to kind of continuously flip over and over and over again. And like you said, it's not even like we were sure it was going to be some like broken deck, but it led to like a lot of 40-minute turns.
Right.
There were a lot of games where like at one point I remember I think like even majors like got up and like started doing some stuff and told me like tell me when it's my turn, because like it just took me like 15 minutes to resolve a turn.
Mm-hmm.
And it was awful. So there's like one thing I tell people is I played a lot of terrible Magic, so then hopefully you play some good Magic, and things like this are kind of like examples of that. So I don't know, I think it's an interesting story.
Right.
So you could hit. It was very likely to hit Glimpse if you had any way to produce energy, and with like the amount of Cascaders at the time, Chad, it was like very, very consistent to like I was basically putting my whole deck into play on turn 4 and winning with Omnath triggers.
Yeah, it's
like over and over.
We only know Raptor as we've seen it, so
yes.
like we can't fully grasp what it was. But if Mason says like you look at X cards and you can cast those cards, then like obviously something was broken there, right? Like even the card now I think is a little too good for the current modern format as is. Every time I play against it, I'm just like kind of blown away at how good it is for 2 mana. So
yeah, I think it came in a little too strong personally.
Yeah.
That's my opinion on it.
Yeah. So I'll finish up the last part here.
Yeah.
What we learned. This is both a design and logistical failure. This is something we're trying to tackle in a variety of ways. The banned and restricted announcement timing is changing to be optimized for RCQs and a wide spread of competitive play going forward. While we can't guarantee we'll avoid bans in the future, we can take steps to make sure that they will do as little damage as possible for players who want to invest their time and energy into competitive formats. On the inside, it's a combination of things. 1, at a high level, we want to make sure that all relevant groups have had time to impact change in a time window that makes sense for the project. I have faith that if the current Nadu had been scrutinized while our contractors were actively playtesting, things would have turned out better. 2, I'll be putting more effort toward being conservative if I can't draw clear conclusions, as well as encouraging that behavior in others. I didn't know that Shuka was powerful with Nadu. However, I was aware that I didn't fully understand the implications of Nadu's text box. That should have urged me to more aggressively seek out others' opinions, failing any sort of strong conclusions to default to something I better That should have urged me to more aggressively seek out other opinions and, failing any sort of strong conclusions, to default to something I better understood. I was blinded by a goal. Make something that's really awesome for somebody. Ultimately, nobody was happy. I'll conclude by stressing the point that Magic is a game of enormous complexity. We won't get things right all the time or always be able to predict how our formats respond. However, the creation of this game is a labor of love, and so in these situations that fall on the side of clear mistakes with clear solutions, we take them very seriously and are always looking to improve the way we make this game.
Yep. So, I mean, it basically, I can say it, I never got to play test Nadu. And that was kind of the thing. And so, I don't know, you said you had a lot of questions about Nadu, and I told you I can't really talk about Nadu, and here we are. So we have a moment for content.
Yeah, I mean, this one, this basically answers all of them. I'm a little surprised, knowing Major's history and knowing, I don't know who he spoke to, I guess, is sort of the background info. But when I tried to borrow this deck for Baltimore, some of the cards I borrowed them, like the Shukos were for people who played Cephalid Breakfast and Legacy.
Yep.
And Cephalid Breakfast has been around for a very long time, 10, 15 years. It was wasn't always a great deck, but it existed. You had to know what it was like 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And people had Shukos to play that deck. So it's not like this was an unknown thing that targeting something with Shuko or an Outrider ability.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that Majors or the design team should be all knowing. It's impossible to have that info. I'm just surprised that that sort of happened. I don't think anybody's like necessarily to blame. Yeah. I think like the rest of the set, like he mentioned Amped Raptor and you talked about Amped Raptor. That's a very good card that like could have been a lot worse. And I don't really think I know the scope or many other people know the scope of how bad it could have been. And even now I think it's a little pushed. So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Like I think the biggest thing, once again, I guess like right now we're getting into like conjecture because I have not talked to Majors about the Nadu thing ever. We shared some like we've had some conversations since the project ended, but we're not like super tight or anything. Nor have I talked to him about this. I might send him a message. I do have one question in the back of my mind, but anyways, to me it sounds like he didn't fully understand the implications, like per what he said. And so, you know, like Bob in chat saying like testing a card that goes infinite 0 times is actually insane. I don't think Majors realized it went infinite per the like the parentheses thing.
Right.
I think think he thought that when you legend rolled a Nadu, it just wouldn't matter.
Yeah, he even mentions the conversation, like the reason why he wanted to push it was so that it would be powerful in Commander.
Yes.
And that also kind of feels like a logical failing, because Commander is a more powerful format than Modern to me. And I'm not saying that I would catch this, or I would never see the Shuko thing. I didn't get it until somebody explained it to me. But I don't understand. I mean, I understand how it was missed. It just wasn't brought up, or nobody saw it, or these things happen. But yeah, I mean, like you said, I don't know. It's puzzling to me that this happened, and it's a little concerning. He mentions it in the future that he's going to be putting in more work, which that's all he can do, right? Yeah, it's just very interesting. Kind of eye-opening for sure. Also, the other thing that like, I guess the whole process of designing a Magic the Gathering set in my head is always going to be different than what actually happens. And then what actually happens is not going to make sense to me until it's like very specifically explained. So I know that there's a short window with like Sam Black and Jerry T's article discussing it. But the concept of like Majors is the design team lead. He wants to change something last minute, and it just happens. I mean, obviously he's like the end all be all. He has the ultimate say, but it seems a little bit dangerous to do that in an MH set.
I mean, I think it's worth mentioning too that like at the end of the day, someone has to get final responsibility, right? I agree that like it coming down to one person theoretically is pretty dangerous. In practice, Majors is talking to a lot of people. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like he's not siloed off. It almost sounds to me like one of the bigger failings of it is he didn't talk to people about this card enough. Because if you mentioned, he said I should have reached out, right? And so I don't know. Once again, but it sounds to me because I know that we were talking a lot about the stuff with other team departments. Like, yeah, I don't think anyone will get in trouble. Like, so the team was like us 3 and then 3 WotC people. They've made that pretty public, but other play designers came down when they had free time, and we would chat and they would play some games. Like Ben Whites came down once, I remember, and played some Eldrazi decks for us, and he had like worked on the team that won with the blue-red Eldrazi, that pro tour, and like is very smart and very good game designer or whatever. But like he would come down and like did express warnings, and we have like a big meeting on my last day where like basically all of play design was there, and we talked through basically everyone in the set went through their set, flagged cards they thought were problems or potential problems, and we had conversations. And that's just one example of like someone has to make the final call, and it makes sense it's the person who's there the whole time, right? Like, we can't give it to, like, let's say Rosewater as a random example. So, I don't know. I understand it is, like, scary, but it's been that way for, like, basically every set ever. Like, there's someone always makes the final call. But it is, like, very collaborative.
What I mean is, like, and this goes back to, like, my sort of understanding of how I think sets should be, or are designed, and how they're actually designed. He mentioned that there is more people working on the set, but less time, or not more people, but more specific efforts toward this set. So, how long were you? So it was you. You were one of three, right?
Yeah, it was me, BBD, and Brad Nelson.
Okay, cool. That's quite the group. And you were there for a month?
A month and a half.
So, like 6 weeks.
I also had the set a week beforehand, along with a list of curated cards that we thought might matter in Modern. For example, Bowmasters, Delighted Halfling, were things I knew about.
Okay, so the concept was you had, so let me try to frame this.
Yeah.
There's you three that were invited in. There's three other WotC employees, including majors or excluding majors?
Including majors.
Okay. They had a file of cards that were already designed, and they had shipped them to you to read over, and then you would go through and test for X number of weeks and adjust accordingly, or they had half the set, or...
I would say they had about 95% to 90% of the set. So there are some things like Flaige is my card, because Flaige changed, and I told that story enough, you know? And, like, Guide of Souls is, like, part of a Mason card, because it, like, changed, so we helped the Primal Prayer stack. And then, like, Vexing Bauble is, like, the text I tried to put on Guide of Souls and became its own card. So there was room in the file for, like, artifacts to, like, help Standard. Consigned to Memory is a good example of, like, we knew we wanted to have a counterspell that was good against Eldrazi, and we just had a placeholder card, and it was basically, like, it can be this, but we can change it up, too. And that's the story Brad Nelson's, like, tweeted, where we're, like, originally, Consigned to Memory had Split Second and Twine.
Oh.
Yeah. And Split Second and Twine's pretty funny. Problem is that it didn't beat Chalice of the Void. And important to note, when we're doing these things, we're dealing with rain, right? Like, we don't know the exact outcome of anything. A realistic outcome was that, believe it or not, the Soul Land might promote Chalice of the Void.
Right.
And that card would not beat Chalice. So we changed it to be Replicate so that it would beat Chalice.
Right.
Or however it works now. I don't remember the actual word that we put on it. But basically, you can counterspell through a Chalice of the Void. And that was, like, why we did that.
So that sort of idea, that's sort of like the process that you did. So there was sort of a pitched folder, and then you would grind through the folder, so to speak, and make it cohesive with itself and make the rest of the set make sense. Like, obviously printing an Ugin land that promotes Chalice play and then printing a counterspell that still gets got by Chalice is kind of useless, right? Like, the whole point of the MH set is to solve those issues in Modern, like for example, the printing of Force Negation or Endurance, like being able to interact with the graveyard at instant speed, or counter a non-creature spell like Belcher out of your opponent. That makes a lot of sense. And so back to, like, originally when we were talking about with Nadu, that's very thoughtful to me, and that is thorough, and I think that you should be doing that when designing cards, especially with cards in the set. And, like, it's like a second level thing. It's not just, oh, we're making this soul land, oh, we also have this split second counterspell. Okay, well, if you have a split second counterspell, like, people are just not going to play things that get got by it. Okay, well, we want to make powerful cards that they'll play that get got by it, so they all see play together, right? I don't understand, if you have that sort of goal in mind, how pushing something for commander play at the last moment sort of, like, goes to print. Other than, like, it literally just happened, because of the reasons that Majors said, and there wasn't much thought given to it, or there wasn't like much discussion otherwise, which I think is a bit loose.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
but I'm on the outside
yeah,
looking in.
yeah. I mean, once again, I want to make this very clear. If I'm talking about something from the past, in all these situations, I'm talking about my opinion, unless I state specifically otherwise.
Right.
Right. I really don't want to let what I say here be like weaponized against somebody, so I'm saying this now so don't get clipped out of context.
No, for sure, for sure.
But if I do, we can also show them the full clip.
Yeah.
And also, like, I am not part of the final say on these sort of things, you know, blah 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 blah. So that's you know, I have like a voice, and my job was to come in. And for what's worth too, in case people don't know, I was physically at Wizards of the Coast, and we were doing this in person, playing against each other and having like lots of meetings and doing lots of stuff. I think if you look at the Nadu card again, like the one that I saw before it changed, like if you scroll up a little, and you read that card, like we talked about, and this is part of why I like had you talk about it before. We kind of pegged it, and obviously we didn't.
You did
what? We pegged it as a card that. Ginger, I need you to calm down.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's right. Clip this one. I pegged Nadu. I pegged Nadu as a situation where like it is probably a toolbox card, right? Like it's helping something. Okay, so in my opinion, right, and this is all me. If you have a card like this and you're kind of like low confidence it's gonna land in Modern anyways, potentially targeting it towards Commander is a good pivot to make a card that someone's happy with. Right. And I think it's important to like try and have a card have a home. Now the home can be it's like a weird piece of an engine that doesn't exist yet, right? It can be the home is like it's a Modern staple. It can be it's a Commander card. It can be a limited card, right? But a card personally I believe should have a home and a goal. And it sounds to me like Majors kind of agreed with the fact that it is probably not a card that was going to see a lot of Modern play per what he wrote. And so it looks like the idea was, well, if this is unlikely to hit in Modern, let's see if we can at least make it a card that Commander players want to have fun with. So, like, when people are like, why was this a Commander card in my set? And it's like, well, sometimes they make cards for other formats, you know? Because it's like, I understand that, like, the Modern Horizon set has Modern in the name.
Yeah.
But they've been doing Commander-y stuff since the first one.
Oh, they would print Commander cards in Standard. It was very obviously, like...
Yeah.
Tuned to it, like when they started changing the wording from target opponent to each opponent, or each player sort of thing. Like it was very obvious what was happening, whether they didn't explicitly say it. And like, I don't think they should be restricted to printing quote unquote Commander cards to Commander sets. I also think that like doing that is really silly, because Commander players can just play any cards they want to. Because they can just play anything. So, like, everything is technically a Commander card. And Majors even says it in the article, like, they're printing cards so that people will enjoy them. If this card, the reason it's being enjoyed is for Commander or for, like, casual Modern, like, that's a good thing, right? Like, you want sort of it to have a reason.
Yeah, I agree. I think he just thinks that it wasn't going to see a lot of play. Right? And, like, this is all conjecture on our part. Like, we don't know.
Right, 100%.
Yeah, I am personally of the belief, as, like, a designer, that, like, like, it having a home was, like, a fringe sideboard card, and maybe something they do in Commander is reasonable. I also am of the opinion they make too many cards for Commander. And specifically not because it's, like, ruining Magic. I don't think it's doing that. I think it's ruining Commander. Commander players like expressing themselves. So making cards that allow them to express themselves is fine. Making cards that are rate monsters they have to play is not.
Right.
Like, Arcane Signet is, like, a stupid card to make. Now, making, like, this frog that makes other frogs that jump to your hand, that's fucking cool. Let someone build a frog deck and, like, let them figure out what they're supposed to do. But when they, like, print packages... that is when I think the problem is. Or, like, strict, like, rate things they have to play.
Okay, so with that in mind, how do you feel about Soul Ring, then?
I mean, I think Soul Ring's just a part of the format. Like, I think it's dumb to talk about that. It's just part of it.
Sure, you know but I mean, like, in regards to Arcane Signet. So, do you think that... and this can be related to 60 card formats, maybe like Legacy, and I'll bring it back to that. But the idea of like Soul Ring being in the format as a part of the format is fine, and you want to give people tools to do things. Soul Ring's a good example because it's colorless. Why is Arcane Signet different?
Because it was printed for Commander. So it feels like they are getting handed things versus discovering. Does that make sense? Like Arcane Signet like mentions your commander. And it's like very heavy-handed. And I think a thing that's really cool about Commander is self-expression. But the more cards they make like Soul... Because here's the trick, right? Your Commander deck should almost always play Soul Ring. So your Commander deck's really 98 cards. Right? It's your Commander and Soul Ring. And let's be honest, Command Tower, if you're more than like one color. And then let's be honest, and then like let's be... You know what I mean? Like there's... The more of those you put, the worse the format, in my opinion, gets. This is all my opinion.
Yeah, of course.
But like, yeah, that is where I stand on it. So like, I am of the opinion we should have left Nadu like this. Like, it should not have changed without even knowing what happened in the future, right? I also do believe, for what it's worth, like he said, that if they had shown me the Nadu we had today, I would have figured it out.
Oh, I mean, it sounds like you figured out the Amped Raptor thing.
Yeah. A lot of my job was, like, figuring out the weird shit. Now, so, I would not have had the good versions y'all have, but I would have figured out, like, on Outrider, on Core Shuko stuff for sure.
Yeah, of course. I guess where I'm going with this, is that I just read something in chat, my brain blanked. I'm not sure why they thought giving it flash would be good in Commander. What have you played Commander before?
Yeah.
If you have a 3-mana permanent that if your opponent tries to kill it, you draw a card. You're already up a card. If it's green blue, you're in 2 of the best colors, and then like if it gives your permanents flash, you can cast fucking anything at instant speed. Like that's crazy. Like that's like any permanent. I'm not even gonna just like tell you like any permanent. You can probably think of a few, and then also like it's just fun. It's just cool to do. Like it breaks one of the most basic rules of Magic, which is like you only cast things at like at sorcery speed. Like this is the opposite of that. It's a brand new play experience.
It also slows the game down a lot too.
Yeah.
Right? Like if I always have flash, I always have to respond, which means the turns take longer, which makes the game take longer. So giving everything flash might also just be like it's gonna ruin the experience. And if we have like, let's say 2 Nadu players, right? Like that could be pretty rough. I know there's like Vidalcan Orrery and stuff like that, but that's a card that's like dedicated to doing that. This is doing it with upside.
Yeah, and so Prophet of Crewfix is banned, but this goes back to like Majors even kind of talks about it a bit. He said he didn't want to do this here, where he would slightly take a few things away to make it good for the format, not necessarily like unplayable like this one is, which is also something I was going to bring up. I remember now, but like if Prophet is very obviously busted and you're looking to design a card in a space, you have to figure out how it's not busted and how it's playable. So often if you have something like Prophet, you're like, okay, anything close to that is probably pretty broken. This is like a reasonable way to make it so you can cast your permanent spells at instant speed in blue-green. And you get some amount of value for putting it in your deck if your opponent wants to kill it. So it's all of a sudden like better than Leyline of Anticipation, because it's a creature and all these different things, right? And ultimately, and Majors mentions this again, it's about enjoying or like finding a reason for it to be in there. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be like the best possible. And also that's an impossible thing to do. The whole thing is like, this is something that can be played with, and this is something that can be enjoyed. And I don't understand how like people kind of miss that, I guess.
Yeah. I also think one of the things that like rubs me away is like when I read this card, it's very hard to put Leovold in the set, right? Like the original Nadu is kind of a Leovold-esque card. Probably worse than Leovold, but maybe more fun because it doesn't have the can't draw text attached to it. And like, you know, Leovold is a card that I personally think would be interesting in Modern, but I can't even have the conversation because this card sits on it in the file.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Like, I read this, I'm like, well, can't really advocate for Leovold. That's what Nadu does.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I'll do some hot takes on the bands maybe in a bit on Julio. I want to get back to what I was talking about with the Arcane Signet Soul Ring sort of talking point we were having. I guess at this point, and I don't know if there has been, and this goes back to the ban and restricted announcement today, and I assume this was something that was discussed while working on MH. I hope it was. I'm making an assumption. And you know, if you're not allowed to say yes or no or whatever, you don't have to. Just say you're under NDA or whatever. With new power level magic, we can call it fire design or whatever, I have personally been noticing that cards in these MH sets are overly powerful compared to things going through standard. That makes sense. That's sort of like what wants to happen so that they can like pinpoint things. I mentioned force negation and endurance as like powerful answers to these things. There's been a few that have missed the mark. Fury, Grief, Nadu, Hogak, I would argue Ren and 6 even, Ragavan before Bowmasters, etc., etc.
I don't think Ragavan is, but I'm with you on the rest.
Right. Urza Saga. You mentioned that you don't like how Commander has these cards that sort of meet a certain point where you have to play them. It removes the like joy of building or expressing yourself in Commander. Do you think that there is a similar thing in 60 card formats? Also, if there is or isn't, do you think that there should be a certain number of cards that fit into this like very, very powerful, maybe crossing the line or not crossing the line but towing the line sort of range? Like, we still have the One Ring in the format, we still have Bowmasters, we still have Ren, Saga, the pitch elementals, right? And we had Fury and Grief for years. And so I'm of the opinion that if we're gonna keep pushing these cards and they're gonna like sort of break the format for specific decks, right? Like Scam was the most played deck for a very long time, up until MH3, even like post Fury ban Scam. But it was like, it wasn't even across the format, for example. Like it was Scam and like decks that played the One Ring and that's it. I think if you have powerful cards,
yeah,
and Rhinos,
Rhino,
sure. But there's sort of this issue where it's not balanced across the format. Even now, like with Nadu being in the format, very obviously Nadu is very good, the best. And then you have Energy, which is also very, very good. Necro, and like the Ring decks. Do you think that there's an issue in printing these high power level cards that immediately slot into these decks, so it removes sort of the deck building aspect or the meta like changing aspect? Like Tron has to play the One Ring now, not necessarily a bad thing, but they have to. Same with Amulet, same with like I mean Scam had Grief and that was a new deck.
Yeah, I mean I think I get what you're saying. So just to make sure I understand correctly, you're kind of saying like, hey, you know, when we talk about Commander, one of the things I don't like is that like it's like you really have like 85 cards you can play with, right? There's like 15 you kind of have to. And when you look at Modern, a lot of the decks now kind of are like, well, you can play a Saga deck or a Ring deck or a this deck or a that deck kind of situation, right? Is that like a fair characterization?
Yeah, so like you said like Arcane Signet's bad for Commander because it references the Commander, and you're actually only playing 99 or 98 cards now.
Yeah. I think there's a couple things going on there. So first, like, I think part of Commander is the self-expression. I think that is part of 60-card formats, personally. But I think it's much bigger in Commander for non-CEDH variants. So, like, in normal Commander, I think it's a lot of, like, expression. So limiting the number of cards they can realistically, like, not play, I think hurts more there. I think it's going to happen in Modern. I think there is some problems with just like Horizon sets in general, like I'm of the belief that the best way to do a Horizon set is to release a bunch of threats that look to be pretty reasonable, but not Hogak Nadu level. Which, to be fair, I think we did a pretty okay job at in MH3, and is all my personal opinion, and release a couple cards that are good reactive cards, but not a ton. And I believe that you should like lay the seeds for decks. And so I think, for example, Necro is a good example of that, where like there is no deck like Necro in Modern before it, right? Like if you look at Modern, mono black coffers, oh, you have my name thing upside down, dude. Like coffers is like the closest example, but even that's like not totally the same to Necro, and there's some amount of we are going to do cool, exciting cards in MH sets, and we're going to play with fire a little bit. And playing with fire is not necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I know you didn't design for Pioneer,
yeah.
but the issue I have with Pioneer, and I think a lot of people have with Pioneer, they just don't know exactly what the issue is. They just have this negative response and then they express it. Is that the format isn't super deep, and that the answers and the threats are very specific to certain colors or certain archetypes. For example, Thoughtseize and Fatal Push, or you have Lightning Axe and what's the 1-mana one that deals 3 if you have Spell Mastery?
Fire Impulse.
Right. And so Fatal Push and Thoughtseize always go in black decks, normally go in mid-range control decks. The other two are like very good removal spells, probably the next best two in the format, and they naturally fit into Phoenix. So when it comes to deck building, there isn't much difference in Phoenix decks. If there is, you're probably making a big mistake. Like we have the new enchantment from Bloomburrow that some Phoenix players have been playing, or like Prof's Memory instead of playing Time Walk. But it's not changing that much. And so printing these cards into the format, you're kind of forced always to have those spells just be the best spells in the format. And then you talk about threats with Shieldred, or like literal Phoenix itself, or like I don't know what else are the threats, like Amalia for a bit before it was banned. And so I'm just wondering, like, balancing this idea when you're trying to push very powerful things seems to be like disproportionate. Like for example, Grief or Fury, way too good. Solitude, Endurance, Subtlety, probably just the right amount of good. Maybe Solitude's a bit too good, and just doesn't fit into the format well. But if there's a white deck all of a sudden with a lot of other very powerful things, and Solitude just slots in, all of a sudden it's like kind of very broken, right? So I just I'm sort of like, I want to know if you design things to like, what's the design philosophy for these MH sets? Is it to fix issues in the format? Is it to like raise the entire like unilaterally like make things powerful, or like
no, I mean every card has its own goals, which I think that's maybe like the disconnect here. Right. So the goal of an MH set is, I mean, let's be real. The goal of every set is to sell packs to feed the corporate machine. That is just what every set of Magic does, and that's all of them at their core are that way. From your favorite set to Bloomburrow to MH3. Now, from there, MH sets do not need to have cards that warp Modern in order to sell. It helps. Like, if I think one of the reasons MH2 sold so well is that because you had to play Modern you had to buy MH2 to play Modern, which I believe to be a failure of MH2. And there's something I said on the call with them when they like said like, do you want to work on MH3? Was I said to the extent of like, I understand how you made these mistakes, and I am hopeful when I see the file for MH3 it is different. And I think we did do a better job of swinging the needle from a ton of answers to a ton of threats, right? Because I think answers raise the bar of what becomes playable, right? And you're kind of hitting on that with Solitude. Like Solitude, Fury, and Holy Heat, Prismatic Ending, Leyline Binding. These cards decide, answer spells decide what is playable in a format, right? There's some amount of like, if your card is strong enough, they can overpower them. Then yes, like Nadu, for example. But even Nadu, like theoretically, if it was worse to interaction, maybe would not have been as good. Who knows? It's a obviously we're in like cascading worlds, like a 3-1 Nadu, for example.
I sort of my natural thought process is the Tarmogoyf versus Doomblade sort of conversation of Tarmogoyf sucks because you can push it or you can Doomblade it, and then it's actually more like, well, if they don't, Tarmogoyf is just the best thing and will kill you, and then you can just pair Tarmogoyf up with other powerful things, and it's even better, right? And so you can continue. Sorry, that's just the example.
No, you're fine. I just wanted to say that like the goal is not to like. I'm personally very frustrated by a lot of comments I see online that are like modern rotates faster than standard, because I just think that like the bar to be a playable card in modern is so much higher than standard, right? And so standard formats are much healthier and much more fluid on average because the bar is much lower to be a playable card there, right? Like if you think about it, more of the standard card pool is playable percentage-wise in like serious tournament play than it is in modern, right? Because like modern, like even if you discount all the draft chaff, like, you know, 4-man 2/2s or whatever, there's just such a small percentage of the modern pool that's playable. And I think the MH sets unfortunately have an effect that worsens that a little bit, right? And the more Force of Vigors and Force of Negations you get, the more that happens because they become best in class. Which is why I have the belief that having things that generate new decks and are proactive threats is typically the better way to go. Like, for example, I personally, and I've said this a lot, I am not very happy with how Fallacia's landed, right? That's like my card. I very much like it. I know a lot of people enjoy it. I've gotten a lot of messages that people love Flage, and every time I say this, someone messages me and says like it's fine. I think Flage is very, very good at oppressing a lot of styles of decks.
Right.
And like wins the game on its own a little too well, right? Yeah, Ross does not love Flage. And like, you know, I have a lot of respect for that, and I honestly wish Flage was a little worse. Like my ideal card is something that is like a 1 or a 2 of in your deck, you know. I thought Flage was better. I should say this. I knew Flage was better than Croxa. I was like basically 100% as far as you can be when it comes to these sort of things when you deal with Grays.
Yeah.
And I was fairly sure it's worse than Ura. And I think it's played out that way.
I would definitely agree with that.
But I think pressure is what does these things, right? Yeah, I agree with that too, McWin Sauce. Like the arena thing should not have worked with Flage, and that's just an oversight on our part. Like I've been very open about the fact, and so is like the team, that Flage did not get a ton of testing.
This like, goes back to like the counter spell, the play around Chalice thing. Like arena and the Flage is a little too good because of arena. Like you maybe you didn't print them to complement each other, but it worked out that way, sort of thing. Yeah, that was just like missed or whatever. And like I think that I would have had it set so arena said like if cast from hand, do the thing is probably how I would do it. But that's like such an ugly line of text. I'm trying to make it better. Yeah, and it very specifically is like, oh, we tested this and we think it's too good. Sort of. Yeah, exactly. Gives away the. I mean, maybe that's not a bad thing if you're balancing the format, but. Yeah, I think like Arena of Glory should probably have just maybe done something different or done the from hand thing if you're fine with the ugly text. I personally am not fine with the ugly text, but that's very mustachy, twirly game designer-y thing, right? So it's like, you know, sometimes I understand that like that gets in my way and I need to step back and think about balance first. But I try to hand in hand, and often I think you can. So, like, I don't know, like, a lot of the other lands are pretty cool, and I think the red one is kind of the lamest, if we're being honest. And there was a lot of thoughts that, like, the red one might be good with, like, some Eldrazi stuff or some Titan-y type stuff, and, you know, that was kind of where we were looking. Not like a random one of in a control deck, or... Yeah, and, like, maybe it does something, like, in an Ilharg vein, you know... Oh, the pig. Yeah, the oink oink. So like there's a lot of like unknowns, and it was clearly like kind of the weirdest one, but it was kind of hard to make one, and we didn't want one that like mono red. Like at least I didn't really want one that like just slotted mono red, like just a burn land or whatever. I think that would be kind of bad, even though I think burn needed the help, but I think burn's been bad for like so long.
But anyways, that's a me thing, not a company stance. Anyways, long story short, I believe that like the answers really define things. And I think one of the problems with MH sets is the answers are too strong. And like I'm of the opinion that we like missed on Wrath of the Skies. It came out too hot. I know that I personally was pro Galvanic Discharge being 3 energy. I remember Brad was very much for 2. I don't remember how other people landed. But there's also some amount of like we're making all these energy cards. Hopefully there's a tier 2 energy deck. And I really think like Amp Raptor. Outside of, I think Wrath of the Skies is like its own little card. But like I think Amp Raptor just makes that deck a little too synergistic and like too consistent.
Yeah.
And I kind of wish that it was changed, and I wish like Wrath of the Skies was like 1 white X, for example. But you know, such is life. Like one of the things I think that's important to remember too is like I didn't know that they were going to ban Fury and Violent Outburst. Like if I had known they were going to ban Fury and Violent Outburst, the set would look a lot different.
Really?
Like, yeah. I mean, we would design cards around like Fury hitting them, right? Like here's a good example. Ocelot Pride had Ward 1 for a while. You know, like that was like a version of it.
Okay, so this might tie into the sort of convoluted thing I was trying to say earlier. Obviously there's a difference between printing powerful cards for a format and then printing cards for a specific meta. The idea that you didn't know Fury was going to be in the format, would that mean that things like Ocelot Pride or a Johnny would be less powerful?
They would probably be different. I mean, a Johnny and Ocelot Pride. So I guess I can tell the Ocelot Pride story. I think I've told it elsewhere, but I'll tell it here again real quick. So Pride was a card that just had a lot of text on it.
Yeah, it still does.
Yeah, it had more. And like no one was playing it. And the first 2 weeks that I was there, or the first week and a half, it was kind of like do what you want, but also really focus it on these specific cards because we need to figure out what we're going to do with them. So an example that's like Flayers, some of the reprint cards, and some cards that got cut from the file. Like a story I like to tell people is on like my second game, or my first day there, on like my second match, I put 18 basic lands into play on turn 2. And I got that killed immediately, you know? So there was some stuff in there. But Ocelot Pride hadn't really got played. And we started getting assigned cards to work on. And one of the cards was Ocelot Pride. And basically, Majors and myself were tasked with building Pride decks. And it was probably the best modern deck I've ever played.
What?
But it was like a black-white, like Soul Sistery grindy deck. And it's worth noting a lot of the cards are different at this time.
Right, sure. So I just mean like if for you to say this is the best modern deck I've ever played is just such an insane statement, because I've now played Nadu. I played Looting
Nadu
Felix.
might have been better. At the time, it was the best modern deck I've ever played. It was definitely better than 4-color. It was definitely better than KCI, Urza, Oko stuff or whatever.
Really?
Basically, my whole deck was like 1 mana interactive cards and good threats.
Do you think Nadu is better than Oko, KCI, or Oko, Urza?
I don't know. Maybe it's recency bias.
Okay.
Listen.
Yeah. Go on. Sorry, I don't want to.
Yeah. Like maybe this wasn't actually the best deck, but it was definitely like in
it's up there. It's still being up there is crazy.
Yes, it was one of the best decks, and mind you, a lot of cards are different. So like Sorin was 1 mana at the time, and very similar to what you have now. And like the Black Sylvan Library where you bend 3 cards and then you pay a mana and 4 life and add it to your hand.
No.
Yeah, there's a rare in the set that no one knows now, but for a long time it was 1 in the black, mill 3, spend 3 life for every card you want to put in your hand. So you can just spend 9.
Sorry, run that back.
So the idea there's, I don't even know what the file name is. It's like, I'm sure chat knows, but it's 1 in black, mill 3, and the current version is pay 1 life, pay 1 mana and 4 life, excuse me, and add 1 of those cards to your hand. Ripples of the Undeath. Yeah, if you want to pull that up real quick for chat, that'd be helpful.
Let me Google this.
A little scry falling. And so the original Ripples of the Undeath chat, here's a little exclusive for you. Was 1 in the black.
Put this in this deck. It's bad. I think
this card was fucked for a while. Yeah, so it was 1 in the black, mill 3 and spend 3 life per card you want to add to your hand.
That seems insane in any sort of soul system. You just draw. It's just ancestral.
Yeah, it's ancestral. And what's noting, I say Soul History because, like, I had Ocelot Pride, Guide of Souls. I had Abiding Grace was a card that was, like, very good because it bought back Sorin. It bought back my Pride. It bought back my Guide. So my whole deck is 1-drops, right? I have this. I have, like, 1 or 2 Heligods with Walking Ballista as well. I have, like, Ranger Captain to go get my combo pieces. And we sit down to play, and I don't lose, like, all day.
Yeah.
Like, it's, like, 6 hours of playing, and in play testing with these things, sometimes you, like, start to go to 5, and you just, like, kind of scry for a land or the spell. You know what I mean? Like, we need to maximize our time. It's not perfect games of Magic. But I just go, like, 6 hours of not losing, and I start playing by real rules. Where it's like, I'm going to 4. Yeah. And I'm like, Slam, Ripples of Undeath, mill 3 cards, go to 11. You know, Shock, go to 9, play Ocelot Pride, go.
Yeah, treat it like you would play, like, Necro.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, that was one of the things, too, is Ripples was just better Necro for a little bit.
Yeah, like, better original Necro, too. Like, not even the one in the format, like... Yeah.
Yeah, this card was insane. And so was Ocelot Pride, and everything was different, right? Guide of Souls originally had Vexing Baubles text on it, which was like my idea, but then the Vexing Bauble became its own thing, and they got the jump text. So like the deck was very different, but it was basically beating all our Gauntlet decks and all the decks we thought of the future, and it was very, very strong. And it was all 1 mana cards for the most part, and a couple cards that cost more. And it was very, very, very good. And we started nerfing Ocelot Pride. Because before, like, Ocelot Pride at first blush, you know, like, if you, like, take a look at it, it looks strong, but it's also, like, it's a Soul History card, maybe better for Commander than anything, right? And that's where things get a little weird. And so from there, we had to start iterating Ocelot Pride. So this is the worst Ocelot Pride I think I've ever saw. Maybe there was one that was slightly worse before. I don't remember it. But, like, it went from, like, 1/1 with Ward 1, and the cats have lifelink, to like 1/2, and the cat tokens have lifelink. And then it's like 1/1, and the cat tokens have lifelink. 1/1, and they don't have lifelink. 1/1 and has first strike. You know, like a lot of variations of that card. So, Ginger hates Frog.
Yeah,
but,
I think it's awful. I think it's like. It's so bad.
Sure. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess, like, it's so hard to, like, try to... I haven't thought about this before because, well, I mean, I can't think about it. I don't have all this info. I don't know what these cards looked like, right?
Yeah, they look so different.
Right, so, like, when I try to... I've been thinking about Pioneer a lot, and you made the comment about when they print cards, they print answers that are better than all other answers... Like, you don't really like that, I think you mentioned.
Mm-hmm. Well, I prefer to have less answers and more threats.
Right.
They're trying to silence me, chat. I'm losing my voice.
No, Niv is unplayable in Pioneer. Niv is never going to rule Pioneer. Don't think that deck is good. It's tier 3. Next, what I was going to say is... So, the issue I've been having with Pioneer is that... I think the word is unilateral. I don't know if that's correct, if I'm using it correctly. But there's a disproportionate amount of power in certain areas in the format. And so when I look at Modern, and I think of, like, okay, we have Prismatic Ending, we have Path to Exile, we have Solitude, we have, what's the 1-white, exile target red or black permanent, Celestial, whatever.
Yeah. Celestial, I know what you're talking about.
Right, so we have all these options, right? Purge was even played, I think, in some of the Goryo sideboards, so it's not completely dead. Like, people don't really play Path anymore, but whatever. Having these options is good for a format. And obviously, like, printing Prismatic Ending makes Path a lot less playable. Printing Unholy Heat makes Lightning Bolt less playable in some spots. Or Magmatic Sinkhole, for example, which was played a lot before that. Do you not think that printing better answers or newer answers or answers that cover more spots sort of like even out what decks can play what, or like?
Yes, I think it does, but I think the answers hit so much harder than threats do. Does that make sense?
Well,
Like,
yeah, I mean, so I guess my counterpoint, not really a counterpoint, but my follow up to that is, I think I agree with you, but the issues is with having too powerful threats is you end up with things like Nadu.
I agree.
And so
Well, I think Nadu is a bad example.
It's an outlier,
That's
sure.
clearly a design mistake. Like if you want to list a different card in that vein, I think there's plenty to list.
I mean, like Oscillate Pride or
Oscillate Pride's a fine example.
Is like
Nadu's just such a fucking mistake.
Yeah, or even like a Johnny, or like I can name like 4 new cards in the energy deck that I was actually very surprised at how good they were, because the first time I read them I thought they weren't very good. Guide of Souls, a Johnny, Oscillate Pride, Raptor. Those threats are threats that I think are very, very good, despite the answers in the format also being very, very good. Fatal Push, etc., etc. So, like,
I think, like, I'm trying to think of like a good example of a threat that that goes too far in Modern. From the recent MH sets, that I'm just honestly kind of tired.
I mean, all good. You don't have to have an obvious answer, but
yeah, I think like the energy cards are like probably slightly too good, not like crazy. It's fundamentally a Jund deck that has a lot of like flexibility and is really strong, and probably pushes out slightly too much stuff in my opinion. And I'm really just interested to see what happens now that the sets changed. Like, I also don't want to say Hogak. I see Chet saying that one just because, like, that's also a design mistake. But I think there's a lot of, like, we push these threats and they're fine. I think part of the problem with the energy deck is they're too cohesive.
right.
And it's an example of, like, when we make a bunch... And this is, for what it's worth, once again, this is my opinion, is we take a lot of shots in a lot of directions. So I would, like, personally, let's say I would do something like, all right, so we have Guide of Souls, and let's say Guide of Souls is our, like, white Ragavan, for example, right? Like, it's going to go in all the decks. We wanted to do that, blah, blah, blah. I'm not saying that's what it was. We're just pretending. So it has some overlap. So, like, it helps Soul Sisters. It helps energy. It helps random creature human stacks attack, right? And then I might have, like, Ocelot Pride type card that goes a little bit more in the direction of Soul Sisters and a little more targeted. And I might have a targeted card for Enchantress, and a targeted card for Burn, and a targeted card for Mono Green Ramp, and, like, that kind of stuff. I think, you know, a lot of things change when you, like, do that. And I think just one of the problems with MH3 that I was definitely not in love with was just how cohesive the packages were. Like, I think we just did too much energy. We did too much Eldrazi. But at the time I got there, this is like, that's what we have. Like, and it's my job to like make it work.
Do you think that that sort of creates an issue, like you were describing for Commander?
I don't feel equipped enough to talk about Commander.
I mean the Arcane Signet thing.
Yeah, to some extent. I mean, they've said it publicly that, like, they didn't think they were going to do Eldrazi or energy for a while. And so, like, this was their chance to give those players some cards. I think we did energy better than than Kaladesh. But the cards are stronger because they are Modern Horizon cards. And Modern Horizon cards just get to be stronger. They don't have to be. They are just allowed to be. So, I don't know. It's pretty... It definitely has some amount of that. I'm very interested because, to me, I mean, if they had banned the One Ring too today, I feel like we would have had a very fresh Modern, and we would be like looking at MH3 all over again with like clear eyes. I think now we're kind of looking at things with the eyes of the One Ring in MH3, so things are going to be kind of weird still. And I don't know. I'm interested to see how the format plays out. I'm interested to see what's going on. I personally think the One Ring is an abomination and should never have been printed, and is not a worse design mistake than Nadu, but
it's up there.
Yeah, I think it's worse than like Renin 6, which I think is pretty horrendous.
Yeah, Renin 6 is also really bad.
Yeah, not as bad as Astrolabe, because Astrolabe breaks mana, and mana is the system of the game.
I always forget that Astrolabe is banned. That card, yeah, it's another one where I just forgot.
Yeah, I mean, personally, my thing with the One Ring is that like now you either need to win the game before it comes down and you stabilize after. Like I always say that like if you untap on like turn 6 curving out with a ring deck, it's like so hard to lose.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like your deck's designed to kind of always win those games, and I just think it does some like perverse shit to the metagame. And I also just think it's not very fucking fun. Kind of like when everyone complains about grief, and they're like, "Oh, early on I get grief scammed." I'm very sympathetic to that.
Yeah.
I think it's not super fun. I think I did it a lot. You know, I won an SCG doing it or whatever. But like, I think the One Ring invalidating all my previous choices is much worse. And to me, it kind of goes to the game design theory of like flipping coins. So let's play a game real quick, Ginger. We're gonna call
I
it.
love games.
I love games too. Let's call it rando chess.
Rando
So
chess. Okay.
It's exactly the same as chess.
Uh-huh.
Except at the end of the game, we roll a dice for the loser, and if the loser rolls a 6, they win instead.
So you have a 1 in 6 chance to win the game if I lose.
Yeah, whoever loses has a 1 in 6 chance to win, and it just like okay, like the better player wins the majority of the time still, right? But they lose a sixth of the time as well. They just like lose some of the games, and it invalidates all their previous choices, right? This is obviously a super heavy-handed example, but it's an example of how I feel when I play against the One Ring, where it's like I made all these choices, and then you know the McWinsauce very well-built 4-color deck slams the One Ring and takes over the game, and I'm like, oh, I thought we were playing a game of resources, and the One Ring makes it about 1 billion resources, and I personally fucking hate that, and I think like I'm super against the One Ring for that reason. But that's like a personal opinion. I don't think it's as some other stuff.
Let me back up then, because this,
yeah.
I think that's a good point, and this sort of might be what I was trying to say earlier.
Mm-hmm.
The One Ring doesn't raise the water for the entire format. It only raises it for some decks. If we're playing this chess game, I don't know enough about statistics to give a good example.
Yeah.
But let's say that there's an equal chance that when the loser rolls a 1 in 6, the winner now has an equal opportunity to roll a dice and win anyways, right?
Sure. Yeah. But let's say they roll a 6 back to counters it out.
Right.
Sure.
In theory, like you could do this by giving every other deck in the format a One Ring.
Correct.
Okay. So obviously, like if we look at specifics, the Boros Energy deck can play the One Ring. I'm not saying it should or shouldn't. 4 mana is a lot. I haven't thought about it much. People are discussing this. Why?
I think at worst it's reasonable for what it's worth. Okay, so in chat, I think at worst One Ring with energy is reasonable, and like maybe a sideboard plan. Like truly.
Well, I just mean like literally just slotting the card.
I know what you're talking about. Okay. I'm just saying I give in chat some actual Magic content.
Right. So I just think like this is sort of like my failing as a player who's thinking about design of like I don't know when it's okay to have a bunch of very powerful things in the format because they balance each other out. For example, like you gave the One Ring point where you're playing and you're trying to do the resource thing and then your opponent plays the One Ring. If you as the player also have cards that are equal to the One Ring, is that not a similar opportunity? Do you not have choices to build your deck or design the game or play the game around that turn 4 thing?
I mean, yes, I think you can. I just think the One Ring is so best in class and so invalidates anyone else trying to do card advantage stuff that it becomes like the de facto version. So like I don't know, if I'm understanding you correctly, I don't think it's like the One Ring ruins the game. I just think it makes it a different game, and if the game is about card advantage, it becomes like so much like, oh well, the One Ring hit, now I'm dead.
Right. You know? This sort of happened in Pioneer for a bit with Shieldred. People like really just decided that Shieldred was the best thing ever and couldn't be beat. And then what actually happened was the format sort of sped up a turn. Or
I think the Ring does that for what it's worth.
Right.
But like, I guess to answer your question about like what does a balanced one look like, I think pre-Lord of the Rings Modern is a good example of that. There's a lot of varying different archetypes that have different pressures and different payoffs, and they're all strong. And every deck has like a Yahtzee draw that they win, but there's a lot of skill still to be expressed.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I just the ultimate failing that I'm having is there's different what I think are design philosophies coming from different spots. Whereas my thoughts as a competitive 60 card player, my understanding of what WotC's design philosophy is, what their design philosophy in reality is, and what they explain to me based on the info they can give me to not give all the goodies away, sort of thing. And then there's like the third one, which is what actually happens, which is doesn't have any relation to any of these design ideas, because reality doesn't always work out the same as philosophy or theory. So like in my mind, when they started printing things like Renin 6 or Saga or Ragavan or like Urza Oko, the idea was that they wanted to push the envelope to like make things interesting and add power to the game. But these designs have slowly been like making Magic unfun, which is the opposite of what they're trying to do.
I think it makes it unfun for a type of player, but I agree. Like it changes the game.
So and I think if there's a format that does this well, it's Vintage. Every once in a while, Vintage becomes awful because like something like Vexing Bauble or Saga kind of break it. But if you want to play a really high power format, Vintage is a good way to do that. Everybody has access to these things, and then it's all about like how you approach and how you play the games, how you build your deck. It makes everything really, really important. Every small choice really important because the choices are so swingy. I personally don't like that because I can do everything right, and then, like you said, my opponent can just 1-in-6 me. But I think that's balanced. When it comes to the idea of MH sets, based on how they've been printed and how they've changed formats, I think that they're moving Modern and or Legacy closer to what I see as Vintage. And I think that is a thing that like casual or non-super competitive players want, but it's just not actually hitting the mark. And then what's happening is the players don't understand the design philosophy of WotC, and they only get the outcome, and it creates this dissonance and this anger and animosity towards these MH sets, when in reality people forget that we get things like endurance and force negation.
Agreed. So
but,
I guess...
Sorry, I just want to... One last thing. I'm including Lord of the Rings in this. And so I think when I think about WotC's design and how they're approaching this and how I think what they're trying to do, they keep having these failings. It no longer matters if what they're trying to do is like balance the format or give a lot of options to the format, because they keep failing. At some point, whatever actually keeps happening is just what they're trying to do, because they haven't done anything else, even if they like try to fix it, right? And so this isn't like a personal thing or whatever. I just don't understand how this can keep happening when it's very obvious that this is what's going to keep happening, right?
Yeah. So I think there's a lot going on there, and I also have 30 minutes before.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. We can wrap this up.
No. You're good. I don't want to sound like whatever. I've already taken like an hour of your time. No. I've had a lot of fun talking about this, and this is something I wanted to talk about before. It's just I knew if I talked to you about the Nadu stuff, you're going to be very unhappy. You know?
Yeah. Sure.
I just couldn't tell you.
Having more info. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of things you talked about there, and I want to work through some of them. So the first is the info thing. Yeah, and the info thing I think is very interesting. So like, let's just talk very candidly. There have been like 9 people or 8 people that have contracted on MH sets from 1 to 3. There's Jerry Thompson, Tom Ross, Brad Nelson, and BBD worked on MH1 and MH2 and MH3. Sam Black and myself. Those are the 6 people who have contracted for the MH sets, with Brad and BBD coming back. Let's also be very transparent and honest. I'm the worst of those players, and I have no doubts about that.
Yeah, you're still good though. You're better. You're better than 95% of players. Yeah, I think you're a very good designer. Let's put it that way.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's totally reasonable. And like transparently, like I was in the interview process for like working in play design when I was offered the MH3 gig, but it was not because of that.
Right.
There are other reasons, and that's a story I can tell some other day. Obviously, I don't work at Wizards right now because we're talking, but I also think 95 is kind of rude. I think it's more like 99. But anyways, I think I'm good at Magic.
How many people play Magic, Mason?
I'm just fucking with you. I'm just.
You think I'm a statistician?
Yeah. Yeah. Ross gets it, but like it's fine. It's not the end of the world. I know I am the worst of those players to have done it, and I have no delusions.
The worst to ever do it. Pew, 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 pew.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I like one of the things I have tried to do is be a bit more forward, right? With like kind of how things have gone. One, I love design. Like game design is like my passion, is what I want to do, and it's the thing I like talking about. And I think what you said there is like there's this frustration where the players don't get a lot of stuff from WotC. Right. And there's somehow that where the WotC people just kind of have their hands tied, right? And they talk about what they can, and
I know
it's very awkward. But there's also moments where I think they like put their foot in their mouth, like Andrew Brown talking about the Grief Legacy Specialist thing. Like that is an example of like, dog, no one was talking, just like don't say anything right then, talk about other things.
I remember this. I don't remember the exact circumstance, but I remember what you're talking about.
Yeah, he's just on the stream during the last like there's not gonna be a BNR, talked about how like they have a specialist for Legacy. They're a Legacy specialist said I'd probably ban Grief, and they said we're not going to do that right now. And for what it's worth, I don't think a Legacy specialist should have final say. I think it should be a group thing.
Yeah.
But when you don't convey everything involved in the process of banning a card, and you only say that line, what are people to think?
Right.
Right. And so like I have been trying actively to kind of deveil what I can and not get blackballed by WotC.
No, yeah.
Like,
I mean, yeah.
Like this stream, I was on Jerry Thompson's podcast where I had to answer the Nadu thing without being able to say it.
Yeah.
I'm also in a spot where I can't just talk about the Nadu change.
No, totally.
What am I to do? So I hope that these conversations are helpful for people to understand some of the stuff that's going on,
right?
And kind of come to more educated things. So I do agree with you that it's like we have this weird thing where WotC tells us some stuff, but not everything. And there's a lot of like you have to kind of read between the lines or pay super close attention to get everything. And I think it leads to a lot of misunderstanding with players. So I hope this stuff is helpful, and I hope people enjoyed it. Next, talking about Modern, and like the shooting the shots thing and like the decks. I just think that is over time the bar is going to get higher and higher. Horizon sets are going to artificially do that. I think that's an unfortunate example. I think it's an unfortunate side effect of these sets that can be pretty good. I think a good example of like how different things are and like the way that like I would like to do things is the card Fanatic of Ronas, which I'm going to put in your chat real quick. We're going to tell a story that was saved from my YouTube video, but we'll tell it now.
I like this card.
This card's great. It's a sweet card. You want to pull it for chat real quick. So this is not the version of Fanatic of Ronas I saw for a long time. We changed it near the end, but for a long time, this was a 1 mana 0/1. Or maybe it was a 1 mana 1/1. I can't remember which. But it made green equal to its power.
Oh.
Which is pretty cool. And it had the Eternalized text.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, okay.
Pretty good.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So that, in my mind, is like kind of what I would like more of the MH sets to be like. Now, there was a 1 mana 1/1 that you could play Scale Up and play Primeval Titan on turn 2. But you need to have all those cards. And your 1 mana 1/1 had to live. Right? But like the MH sets have done this weird thing where we talked about the answers hit so much harder than the threats do, that MH1 I think had the right idea, right? Where it's like we're gonna print some answers that are pretty good. They didn't even warp the format that much. Like Force of Vigor was the one that warped the hardest, I think, and Force of Negation had some good knock-on effects, but it wasn't highly played, at least in its lifetime of MH1, right? And we had a lot of good threat cards, and generally was really good. And they kind of swung the needle in the direction that Modern already was. Because remember, Modern before MH1 is very much like Pioneer, at least before today, where it's like there are some interactive decks, but for the most part, people are ships passing in the night, right? And MH1 was like, we have a lot of that, but we also have a couple cards for people who don't like that, which are kind of like what you were describing as yourself as a competitive player, right?
Yeah.
Then what did MH2 do? swing the boat the other direction. And
Yeah.
it's like grief, unholy heat, solitude, force of subtlety, endurance, cards I'm forgetting, all of these sort of cards, they push those a ton. And it makes sense because when you think about it, modern historically, those cards weren't good enough. And so what they did is they took a lot of shots. And if you imagine it as like throwing a dartboard, it's like higher than normal, right? Like you said, a little higher. And sometimes they hit too high. And they just happen to hit very high on a lot of cards in MH2, which fundamentally changed modern. And to me, MH2 is the moment that we have a Ship of Theseus moment, where it's like, is modern the same modern it was?
Not a Greek understander.
Do you know the Ship of Theseus thing?
Maybe.
All right, so the Ship of Theseus, basically, Ginger, really quickly here, is like there's a ship that is the, Theseus' ship or whatever, right?
Guy ship,
and, Yep, and as you change the, like, let's say, as time goes on, you swap the logs, you fix the flag posts, blah, blah, blah,
Is
right?
the final product the same as the original product, even though
Exactly.
Okay.
It's the Ship of Theseus. His ship is different, despite being the
Yeah,
same
it's like when you have dinosaurs and they die and you make like oil out of them, and then you break that oil down and make like a plastic dinosaur.
Yes.
Is it a dinosaur or is it a dinosaur?
Get me off this ride. And so, anyways, yes, so you understand. So like that to me is that moment. And then MH3, I think we tried to switch things back a little bit, in my opinion, where it's like, let's get some more threats and less answers. I believe my personal look back on MH3 is that the answers were still hitting a little too hard, and we had too many cards in the same direction. And that is where a lot of the mistakes in my mind come from. Where I think if we have more spread out designs, so it's not like all the energy cards are just like kind of working together, and then we have like more things like the Ronus that's like pushing you to play a pump spell deck, as an example. And we have those, and we have like slightly worse threats, or slightly worse answers, excuse me, and slightly better threats that are spread. I think we have, like, in my opinion, what could have been the best MH set. I don't think we have that. I think MH1 is still the best set. I think it's better than MH2, personally. But only time will tell. Maybe it turns out to be better. Maybe it turns out to be way worse than MH2. Who knows? But I do think that there's just, like, a lot going on with these sets. And we, like, try really hard to make them fun and playable and solve some problems and create new archetypes and do things. And sometimes you just miss. And sometimes, too, like, it takes time for things to get figured out. Like, I had Goblin Bombardments in my deck very early. With the Johnny and all those cards.
I was,
That was a card that was, like, day one for us. It took y'all weeks.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why it took so long, but I agree.
Yeah, so, like, I'm not even sure what I'm saying is true, right? Like, we might look back on this and it's like, actually, MH3 was fucking Pog, besides Nadu.
I mean, I think
I doubt that to be the case, honestly,
yeah,
but, like,
I think what you're saying is true.
Yeah, so, like, I'm going to be interested to see how things go with time. I think there's a lot of frustration. I wish they talked more openly about stuff, and I wish I could be fully transparent and answer everything and also talk on behalf of Wizards, but I can't. And I really hope that we get to a point where someone from the play design department takes up Mark Rosewater's, like, design department thing and is, like, talking about that stuff in a very understandable, forward, and transparent way. Mark Rosewater has basically given, like, a free college, like, course on game design if you go out there and look for it. But we have nothing on this sort of design stuff. And this stuff is, like, very interesting to people, too, and affects a lot of people. And I think it's frustrating when we have part of the company being very open and the other part being very silent. Yeah. That's their choice. They can do what they want. And I can only speak to, like, the stuff that I was, like, a small part of. You know what I mean? And also, I think, like, personally, like, kind of like what you said, I think my skill sets and things lean more towards design than play design. Like, I think I'm fine at the play designy stuff, but I think I'm better at the design stuff. So, like, I don't know. It's a very awkward spot. Magic is a very big game. I think it serves so many masters, and it's just really tough.
Yeah, and a lot of my frustration really comes down to the lack of transparency but the reason why I'm not like really upset is because I know at some point in the information line, like, it just can't happen. Like, they can't give us that info, or if they give us that info, it like the lame duck format thing happens, or like we've had a different way of doing ban and restricted announcements like 5 different times over the past 3 years. And I understand we're in a post-COVID era, tournaments are different, and like you said, like there's more info, like it takes people longer to figure things out, so like you don't want to ban things if you don't know if they're broken. Like the Grief ban today is a good example. Like I think Grief should have been banned with Fury, but it got banned today, and even though like it's worse than what it was then, but like it probably should be banned anyways, whatever. Like the lack of transparency and the lack of info sometimes is just like really, really bad. And then when we get articles like this one from Majors today, I think it's helpful, but I think most people only view it as negative.
Yeah,
because
I think and I hope that they don't. And hopefully stuff like this little stream helps a little. And I'm hoping social media is very normal and reasonable about it.
No, yeah, come on, man.
Yeah.
Okay, one last thing I want to ask. So I talked about design philosophies and reality. You as a designer have a philosophy for what you want out of games. You don't have to explain to that at length what it is.
Yeah.
I assume when you came into the MH3 design group, the other people you worked with had that same idea, and specifically WotC did also.
Yeah.
Did your design philosophy match WotC's? How much did it change? Would you say that your design philosophy from when you started MH3 changed at the end of it? And do you think you changed the design philosophy of WotC's, or what their design philosophy for the set was by the end of it?
I mean, so like for me to affect WotC is like a pretty big ass.
No, I totally. But you brought up the example of Amped Raptor. And so, or like Oscillate Pride, right? And so, and then even the mention of you not knowing Fury was banned. Them not like discussing with you.
For its worth, we had discussions of banning cards while I was there.
Right.
Like Outburst, because like Outburst was causing weird design problems.
This design, to me, that's sort of like a design philosophy thing where they are wanting you to design around these cards, Fury, that are in the format. And then they're not giving you proper info about like whether it's going to be banned or whether they're talking about specifically banning it. And so it's like you're designing for something that doesn't exist. That seems like a failure in design philosophy, at least how I interpreted it.
Yeah, so I mean, transparently, I thought there would be no bans until MH3 came out. Because what you're kind of speaking to is true, where it's like we designed a set where Violent Outburst and Fury was legal. And we, like, made some decisions with that in mind. We talked about banning Fury. We talked about banning Outburst. We talked about banning other cards.
Okay, so, sorry. I'll let you continue on this thought. What I mean by you influencing WotC is you discussing these things, but not actually having them set in stone for your own info as a designer seems like something that should change for them. And I'm not saying that you are directly, telling them to shift, hey, the players aren't recognizing what we want out of these formats and it's creating a disconnect and they're upset about it. But more of they should explain more, they should give more info, or we shouldn't just if you have 4 cards that you want to ban in the next year because they're too good, or we should be able to discuss that, right? Or you should, not me, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, so transparently, we just didn't think we were going to ban anything. Okay. That was told to me. But Modern is such a long lifespan, right? That things are going to get banned and unbanned, right? Discussions of unbans came up. They didn't tell me they were going to do preordain because they didn't plan to do preordain. If they had planned to do preordain, they would have told me. There is a card that was mentioned to me they thought might get unbanned, and I was told about it and told to think a little bit about it. And obviously I'm not going to mention it right now, there's a card that like it was floated and it was like a thing they said might happen. So I was told some of this, right? But things change, and I think it's a very interesting point of like, let's say MH3 drops, and Fury, Violent Outburst are not problems anymore. Just pray pretend for me for a second.
Yeah, I love this world. Yep.
Yeah, that sounds sweet. You all have to suffer through Modern for 6 more months with Fury, and I'm of the opinion Fury should have been banned forever ago.
It's how I feel with Grief, but yeah.
Yeah, I think Grief and Fury should have both gone at the same time.
Yeah.
I think that's a totally reasonable, and honestly, I think Grief should have left before Fury.
It's one of the reasons why I think. Did you see Mangu's tweet?
I did not see Mangu's tweet.
Oh, it's just kind of. I understand where he's coming from. It just seems non-critical. Anyways.
Sure. Yeah. Anyway, so I was given information. I was told to work what I work with, and I think to your question, like, I think I got better at doing it. Obviously, like getting to work with these people, ask a lot of questions, learn a lot. I think I improved, and I think I did help on some things with like taking some hardline stances and defending them. Like a thing for me is personally, I would like for there to be a better version of the card that is believable to print than the version we are printing. If that makes sense.
Sure.
So I'll give an example. Ragavan, I think is like about as strong as a red 1-drop can be.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we have this imaginary line, and Ragavan's toe is right in front of the line. And he's like a little kid, and he's like, I'm not touching my sister, and it's like imperceptible not touching her. And that is Ragavan. I personally would prefer to have a card, and this is my personal stance, that there is a step above that I can imagine easily printing. Right? And I would like for those things to be the ones that we print, or the ones that are a step below. If that makes sense. There's room to do better. Because I'm of the opinion that Magic is a game that I hope lasts another 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Modern and Legacy and Vintage and Standard and Pioneer are going to all change dramatically and be ships of Theseus themselves.
Yeah.
I would like to not speed that up, and I would like to create some cool, interesting cards, and I would like to, believe it or not kill my favorite game in my favorite format. And at the end of the day, like, there are some spots where I took like a pretty hard line stance on a couple of things that like y'all would think is stupid if I were to talk to you about.
Right.
Because you haven't seen the other versions.
Yeah.
And I think a good example of something like this is Nethergoyf.
Where
Nethergoyf was stronger than the version you're seeing. Not dramatically, but was a better card. And as a card that myself and someone at Wizards, whose name I won't say for the sake of not wanting to speak on their behalf, were kind of like, hey, we should do this weaker version. It's still very appealing, still very good, and we don't need to push this to 10. Like, we can make this other card in the future or a version like it. And we have this Nethergoyf, which I think is a really cool, really fun card that some people like, and I hope we'll see more play that now that Nadu is gone. And maybe with Grief being gone, maybe that just makes this too hard of a card to see play, or maybe with it being gone, it's more reasonable to play Jund decks. I don't know. But at the end of the day, I think is a spot where I can imagine a stronger version of this card and printing it. Right? And we didn't do that version, we did this one. Another one is the flip lands. Like, the flip lands are cards I was not super happy with. But I'm not in charge of the file. I'm just like I'm like the dude at McDonald's, you know what I mean? So it's like, I'm gonna do my job, and like I'm not super happy that we're like, printing all these stupid flip plans. And I tried to like make them weaker because I had a real worry of decks that didn't play lands.
Yeah.
And like I built decks that were like one island and like all the blue cards. You know what I mean? And like tried those out. So, end of the day, I affected them a little. They affected me. There are differing opinions, and we just tried to do what we thought was best. Everyone at Wizards who I interacted with wanted to make the game as fun and balanced and not rotate the format crazily. Like, we wanted to have a fun format with new cards injected, because obviously there's been some new cards, and hopefully it would make the format a more fun experience for the net average person. And we would create some cool cards, and there'd be some sick ass cube cards, and there'd be some cool commander cards, and there'd be all these things, and it'll be fine. You know?
Yeah.
And that was the goal. And like the goal isn't to rotate modern.
Yeah.
Like, believe it or not, like rotating modern is not what they want. Like, that is not actually good for them.
Yeah.
So like they don't make a bunch of money, I think, when that like happens, unless it is like just all those cards, and even then they don't like see the benefits of it. So I personally am of the opinion, and maybe it was different, and maybe they all just lied to me, for the 6 weeks I was there, and all the meetings and all the conversations and all the lunch talk, and everything that we did, and all the people who seemed to care. Maybe they were all wrong and they were all lying to me. But I think a more realistic example is everyone's trying to make a fun form. And it doesn't, like, rotation, like, a lot of these modern decks were not going to last the test of time anyways.
Totally.
Yeah. And these things kind of sped things up, and, like, I think Humans is a good example. And, like, for a long time, people were like, Humans isn't playable because of Fury. Right? And I was like...
Humans
and there's a lot of, like, pretty snide tweets on my part, where I'm like, when they unban Fury, surely my Humans deck will be playable again. You know? And it's the same thing with Burn. Like, I saw a bunch of people be like, Flage is going to make Burn playable. And I'm like, well, first off, Burn's not playable, even if Flage was a good card for them. And second off, it's a good card against Burn. And if we didn't print Flage, your Burn deck would still suck ass. Do you know why Burn is good? It was consistent and was mana efficient. Other decks weren't.
It's powerful compared to the rest of the format, too. Those are like, whenever somebody asks me about what makes a deck good, I say if it's powerful itself, if it's consistent, and then its sort of place in the format is reasonable. And I think one of the good things that happened recently with the One Ring is it's sort of like Tron is powerful, it's consistent, its place in the format wasn't very good because the other decks in the format were more powerful or more consistent at cheaper mana costs. And so their place in the format was better. And I understand what you're saying about the MH3, and I assume that's what's happening, and that's the goal. And so I guess like when the failings and like everything comes down and the set's released, Burn is cringe. I agree. There's this disconnect of what you want, what WotC wants, and you've said like you got a little better, or like you learned a bit, and they sort of learned a bit about what happened. Yeah, I mean, I'm just a little at a loss at, like, how this comes to... I mean, like, I know how it happens. Majors directly talked about it, but I guess one follow-up I wanted to ask was, we mentioned Ragavan being towing the line. And I think Ragavan is a good example. I thought Ragavan might have been across the line at some point. Recently, the reason I know it's not is mostly because of Bowmasters. I don't think Bowmasters is good for the format, though. I think Bowmasters is too good. I think if they were to print something that would make Bowmasters not too good relative to the rest of the format, like Bowmasters did to Ragavan, we would have a problem because that card would probably warp the format. Obviously, that's a very complicated thing to, like, say and not actually pin down, but the scaling of this power level, at some point you reach the roof and you break through it. Do you think that like, how much of an issue is this where we have Ragavan that's towing the line, we have Bowmaster that checks Ragavan? I don't know your opinion on Ragavan or Bowmaster. Maybe it crosses the line, maybe it doesn't. But
I think I can't ever really know until the One Ring leaves, because it's so tied to that.
Right.
That, like, contextually, I'm of the opinion that maybe the One Ring, if the One Ring's gone, Bowmasters is a strong card, but not a needed to be played card.
Okay.
That's, like, my TLDR.
If you could separate the idea of Ragavan to Bowmasters and put it to A card plus B card, where B card checks A, like, maybe the Goyf Doomblade example isn't great, but something like that where you have a very powerful thing, and it's immediately checked by another very powerful thing. Do you think that is a safe environment to design in? Do you think that is something that should be pushed? Like, do you think it's okay to print more Ragavans if you also print more Bowmasters?
Mm-hmm. No. But I don't know for sure. I need to think about that a bit more, and I'm happy to come back and have this talk someday.
Okay.
Either on stream or in private. But I think part of what happened with Ragavan is he was the best in class, got on the board early and took over, and there are just more cards like that now. And decks like Nadu were good against it, and that's why people talk about Ragavan leaving the format. And I believe
Pride
making
also.
more cards like it is probably not the best long term, because I think it speeds things up. And I think here's something that was really eye opening for me in game design. All right, was when Patrick Sullivan said something along the lines of like, 1-mana cards are already really strong. Like, you don't need a lot to make a 1-mana card strong. They just are strong, right? And I think there's just too much text on a lot of the 1-mana cards. And I think Guide of Souls should have been the Ragavan-esque complaint card, and I think it's a problem that Guide and Ocelot are DRC in Ragavan to me.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Right.
And I don't like that. I don't like that.
You don't think if they printed those 2 cards for every color, do you think that would be okay?
I don't think so if they're that strong. I think having weaker versions is fine.
What if Ragavan and DRC are already printed?
I mean, like how they are now?
Yeah, because like this is like power level is relative, right? So like this goes back to the vintage thing. Like if everybody has access to these tools, like before it was only the red decks that could benefit from having DRC and Ragavan were the ones that were far ahead, and that's why people were complaining so much. Now you have Oscillate Pride and Guide of Souls. If somehow you have cards like that for the color black, blue, or green, or cards that pair with those other color combinations, so that like you play a Ragavan, I play a Guide of Souls.
I mean, we have that for white and red, and I think blacks is like Nethergoyf, and I think blues needs to be figured out still.
Like Tamio, maybe?
Yeah, Tamio is kind of that, you could argue. And greens is like Arboreal Grazer, and whichever mana dork you think is the best.
Well, I mean, I don't think Arboreal Grazer is really comparable in power level, but
I think Arboreal Grazer is a fucking too strong of a card.
Really?
I think that card's fucked.
Comparable.
But I don't think it's like it's not as fucked as like Ragavan or Ocelot Pride, because it doesn't win the game on its own, but I think it is very strong. Like Arboreal Grazer does not read like a standard card to me.
No, of course not, but
yeah.
It is less of a like Ragavan power level on 1 compared to Arboreal Grazer power on turn 1 is drastically different, because Arboreal Grazer benefits something else rather than like uniquely itself.
Yeah, I've got coaching in 2 minutes. I'll say the thing about Ragavan. Yeah, Ragavan, if you protect the queen, wins the game.
Right.
Ocelot Pride, you protect the queen, wins the game. Grazer protects you and accelerates you, which feels more green to me.
Okay.
Right? And so that's kind of where I'm at. And I am sort of the opinion that, like, Grazer requires more of you. Here's a good example, Ginger. I wish the colors, the 1-drops for each color, were more like Grazer and not like Ragavan.
Yeah, I guess what it doesn't necessarily have to be 1-drops. There's definitely a disc. It's not balanced. I don't think the colors are balanced, and I want to know, and you don't have to answer this now because you have to leave soon. Is there a way to balance it if it's not balanced now? And how is the appropriate way to do that if not printing more powerful things into the format? Because more powerful threats, at least. Because we have Ragmans, we have Prides, we have whatever else. And we have Bowmasters, but these things are actively very bad. At some point, you just can't print more powerful things. Unless you're like you're Theseusing whatever, the entire format over and over and over and over again. And then you just get the MH problem that everybody who's playing the format has, and that's a disconnect from the design philosophy. And so I just feel like we're in this hole. We can't get out of this hole.
Yeah, I'll say this before I go. When they sent me that I had to sign an NDA to talk to them about something, I thought I was going to be working on a different set and not this kind of set.
Okay.
And I am surprised they did MH3 so quickly. I personally would have thought MH3 would come out 2 years from now, at the time in which we're talking,
Jesus.
and not this year. And I think they should take longer between MH sets to help fix what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's a me thing.
Okay. Thanks for your time, Mason.
Yeah, no problem. I thought I was going to work on Pioneer Horizons, but that doesn't exist. So
not yet. That we can have a Pioneer Horizons conversation.
Yeah, I'll miss you. I had so much fun. Make sure to follow me at Mason E. Clark and tell Ginger you hate him. All right, bye.